gonna be okay.
To really understand where this all started, we have to go back a bit.
Neil, it is great to get to meet you. I've been a big fan of your work for such a long time, and Duchess is quite the fun continuation of your filmography. And I couldn't help but having flashbacks of things like Payback with this movie, of that sort of sardonic sense of humor, revenge, gangster pick. Where did the idea for this first come about for you?
It's funny you should mention Payback. That is a good reference because I do love that movie. It first came about, Charlotte and I were eating sushi in 2018 and talking about gangster movies, and the thought came of what if we try and make a female version of Scarface, and it just kind of evolved from there into a script form, and then the character grew and the story grew and changed and went through various iterations to get where we eventually landed. So yeah, it's a journey.
So I'd love to hear that. And what was one of the biggest changes from the start to where we are now? And what would you say was your favorite change in that time period?
The biggest change was that in the first draft, I think it was set in America, but it was about Mexican drug cartels rather than it was what to do with drug smuggling and all this kind of stuff rather than diamonds. So the big change in the second draft was shifting the whole thing over to Europe and making it more of a London-based story, and then with diamonds coming in from Africa. And there was the original intention was to go and shoot it in Cape Town, but that never worked out. So we went to Tenerife instead, and it was like. And again, initially the thought was let's shoot it in Tenerife and double for Cape Town. I was like, you can't double Cape Town in Tenerife. You can't double it anywhere. It's either Cape Town or not. In which case, if we're in Tenerife, there's some logic to this being a staging point for getting diamonds out of Africa to Tenerife and then wherever it's got to go. So we're just off the coast of Africa or off the coast of Morocco. So it was like, right, let's just set it in Tenerife as well. And that was it. It was like, okay, we're off and running now.
Well, it worked out because I mean it's such a unique location for the film and creates some very exciting set pieces.
It was kind of fresh, and I think also people expect from a British gangster movie to be all kind of London boys and Guy Ritchie kind of thing, and it was like, let's do something very different. If anything, it's closer to something like Sexy Beast or something like that, which is just it's a different side to the gangster movie.
I couldn't agree more. And so I actually did want to touch upon that because this movie does really feel like it has its own style in the gangster format, obviously with the title cards introducing everybody to the narration, to the way it's visually presented. It doesn't feel like a Guy Ritchie movie or anything else like that. How did you go about finding what sort of visual language you wanted to have for this film?
My biggest inspirations come from movies from the 60s and 70s, to be honest. It's like I love some of the style statements that they made in those movies, the way they were shot. The music was a big one. I gave the composer a remit of I wanted it to sound like it's a 70s movie, and he did a fantastic job. And using the titles and voiceover and stuff like that was just, I'm massively inspired by that particular period, especially in crime movies. Everything from The Italian Job and Villain and all these kind of stuff that was going on in the 60s and 70s. Really cool movies.
Well, there's some great pulls. So I love that you really looked to that era for inspiration. And so I'd also love to talk about the shooting of the action sequences, because I mean, they're not just shootouts. You have some really cool hand-to-hand combat sequences in this as well. And so I'd love to hear, I mean, how much did you work with the stunt coordinator on that to sort of pre-viz how these things would look, and how much was sort of already in your head?
I had a large degree of it in my head, but then other stuff evolves when you go and find locations and things like that. So there's a fight in a workshop that was never in the script. There was going to be a fight somewhere, but it's when we found this location, it's like it's a workshop and it's got tools and it's got this and that, and you walk through it with the stunt coordinator and go, well, how can we utilize everything in here? And so they come up with ideas and I throw in ideas, and I work very, very closely with the stunt coordinators on any project that I do. They're up there with like the closest collaborators that you have on set. And I like hanging out with stunties anyway, because I just, that's just my mindset. So it's a lot of planning, as it is more often the case that, you never have as much time to film these things as you would like. Some we were able to put more time into, some we weren't. I mean, I caught COVID halfway through filming when we were doing the car park shootout. So I had COVID that day, and I had to sit in a tent on the far side of the car park with a monitor and a radio and try and direct that way. But luckily, because we had worked with the stunt guys and the camera guy and rehearsed that sequence, it really was just a case of them getting in there and filming what we'd rehearsed. So that was kind of lucky. On another day, a certain sequence took way too long, and we were meant to have half a day to shoot a last part of the shootout toward the end of the film, and we ended up with 2 hours. It was the end of the day. It's like we have to get this whole shootout in 2 hours. And so then it becomes the case that that's when you, as a director, you've got to think on your feet of, right, let's get the cameras on everybody's shoulders. There's 2 cameras, get them on handheld. We'll run the actor. The actors know what they're going to do. They're going to go there. They're going to be shooting at them. They're going to be shooting at them. Let's see if we can set up some squibs, and like we'll run the whole thing about 3 or 4 times, and you just get in there with the cameras and film what you can. And it's almost like becomes documentary style because they're filming it live. They're just getting in there and seeing what they can get, which is if they were on the streets filming an action sequence, it would be like that. So it gives it a real rawness and an energy to it. But it's hectic, and it would be lovely to have 3 days to shoot something instead of 2 hours. But I think you get some energy, especially when you've got casts like Phil Winchester and Sean and Hoji, who know what they're doing. They're consummate professionals. They know how to handle firearms, and so you can let them run with it. They know what they're doing, so I don't have to worry about them too much. It's just getting the shots.
That is pretty impressive, with all of those obstacles in your way, that it just still came out as incredible as it did. So kudos to you on that. And so, since you mentioned some of the cast, I did want to talk about them. I mean, obviously you and Charlotte and Sean all have a history of working together, but I'd love to hear about, you mentioned you and Charlotte sort of discussing this idea early together. So how much of Duchess, of Scarlett, what did you say came from your mind, and how much came from her mind?
It's probably about 50-50. I mean, in a way, I think there's Scarlett is there's a lot more of Charlotte in Scarlett than in previous characters. The character being an East End girl and stuff like that, which is Charlotte's background as well. So it's probably the closest to her. And then in terms of the other characters, I think for me any excuse to get Sean Pertwee in a movie, because I just love working with him and giving him something new to do each time. It's like getting to work with your best mate, so that's awesome. And then people like Philip Winchester, who I'd seen on Strike Back. I'd almost got to direct on that, but hadn't worked out. So I'd been, itching to find something to do with him, because I think he's fantastic. And other people like Stephanie Beacham and Cole Meany was just, these opportunities for a couple of cameos came up, and it was like, right, let's get them in there because they're just awesome. So it was wonderful.
I love that. And I love that you got to reunite with Sean. I mean, going back to Dog Soldiers, he's been such a great collaborator for you. And I still look back at even Gotham. I loved him in that as well. So it's always fun seeing him pop back up on screen. So was there any one sequence, since this is such a both emotionally and physically hard movie for Charlotte's character, where you two had to sort of have a real long discussion about how far are we going to go with this moment in particular?
Not really. I mean, there was always going to be some tough dramatic moments. So the sequence in the desert, it being one of them, and things like the boxing match where she physically she had to put a lot of effort in and work in and learn how to box for a start, because she's not done that before. So doing a lot of training for that sequence. Can't think there's anything specific. Just every day presented some challenges and some conversations and things like that. But I mean, because we'd had so long to think about this project between 2018 when we wrote it and shooting it in 2022, so there's a lot of discussions about it. We both knew it kind of inside out before we even showed up. So all those discussions have kind of been had in the writing stage.
Well, that's great that you got to have those discussions so early on, and then it worked out the way it did. So What is the big thing then that you're really excited for audiences to get to take away from this movie? Because I mean, there are some great themes about, you know, Blood Diamond and that whole industry, about Charlotte's character, about London, about all these great things. What are you most looking forward to audiences getting to take away from this?
But yeah, I mean, I hope that they take away that they've had a great time, of like some excitement, a good, you know, some good laughs, followed a really strong and interesting character through her journey. And as I say, I hope that they come out feeling better than they went in, which is the basic basic for any filmmaker. We want the audience to come out having had a good time with it. And that's what it is. That's what it's designed for. It's just meant to be a great time.
Well, I think people are definitely going to have a really good time with it. I had a couple more questions before you go. The first of which is narration. I mean, that's always been one that's fascinated me in terms of directing an actor during narration. And I'd love to hear about, you know, you mentioned you and Charlotte, you know, spent plenty of time having conversations before actually getting to film it. But what was it like when you actually got into the recording booth and started putting that part together?
Well, I mean, so it was a two-stage thing. One was writing it, and we wrote and rewrote and rewrote and rewrote that narration like over and over again to try and figure out the tone and everything with it. And then once we got in the recording, it was like, okay, we know the words are right. Now we just got to find the right attitude to go with it. And so yeah, we did a number of takes on all of the narration throughout to find just that right balance that fit with the character, would fit with what was going on screen as well. So, you know, I'm sure it's the same with all narration in every film, but yeah, it's a performance like anything else.
So this movie also has a number of twists and turns. It's not quite in the heist genre, but it's fairly close. And I'm curious if there was ever a thought, and I don't want to get into spoilers per se, but the movie ends on a big twist. And I'm curious if you ever thought about going a different direction with the way the movie ends from what we see now.
Yes, definitely. I mean, because I think it was like I showed it to somebody early on, another producer, very early on in the script stage, and his you know, he had one comment about it, which was kind of like, well, she is the villain. She's a villain, and so she, you know, she has to have some comeuppance at the end. And I'm like, really? Is this, you know, kind of like an anti-hero kind of character, or like, you know, there's plenty of villains you can root for. So I thought about that, but then I kind of thought, you know what? It's like I want to go with the original ending. So
I'm glad you kept it as is, because yes, I agree. She is very much an anti-hero, and I like the way it ends. It leaves it on a great note. And for my very final question before I let you go, I'm a big fan of the Hellboy franchise, and I actually still revisit yours all the time. I know you've discussed your problems with it in the past, but I still really enjoy it. And we've got a new one coming up, and I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts on, you know, this new version. Have you seen the trailers or anything, or what do you think about it sort of getting another life coming up?
I have seen the trailer, but I think, you know, it would be unfair of me to pass any kind of comments on somebody else's you know, version of Hellboy at this stage, given the amount of shit that I got for it. I think it's great that it's finding an audience. My one is finding an audience now, and like I was in Spain last weekend for a film festival, and they screened Hellboy there in Spanish, but the audience loved it, and I had lots of people coming up and saying, you know, they wanted my autograph for the signing Hellboy stuff. So I guess it's like, you know, it's building a fan base over time. People seeing that it's had whatever. It'll never be my favorite film of my body of work, but I'm glad that people like it for sure. Again, based on all the shit that you went through, from what I've read, I can totally appreciate your feelings on it. But I too am glad. Yeah, I mean, as a filmmaker, it's difficult to disassociate the experience of making it with the finished product. But if people see the finished product and take it at face value and they enjoy it, great, good for them. I'm very happy.
Well, I'm glad that there's a little bit of a bright light there, because again, I enjoyed it. I was bummed that you and David didn't get to reunite, because I thought you guys meshed very well together. So in the meantime, though, I really look forward to getting the word out there about Duchess. I think people are going to have a lot of fun with it. There's so many great elements to it. So thank you so much, Neil, for taking the time. I greatly appreciate it.
Cheers, man. Much appreciated.
Nicely done, Duchess. Duchess. She handled that with grace.